Namaskar. Hello and welcome to P Guru's channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. I have a returning guest, Prasiddha Sudhakar, who had done an excellent work in the past about using. We have Prasiddha Sudhakar from NCRI, and you've heard her before about how false information, fake narratives get spread over the various social media channels. This time it's about Pakistan and what it has been up to after the Operation Sindoor or even during the Sindoor. Prasiddha, namaskar and welcome to P Guru's channel. How are you?
Namaste. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, Prasiddha, and thanks for taking time out from your weekend. Weekend is precious time. As a student, as a researcher, you probably have 100 things going. You kindly consented to come and talk to us about this. So I'm going to jump right into the report. You've put together a 12-page report on what really happened once the Operation Sindoor started. From 22nd April, they must have been primed for this, because here is an interesting data. I don't know if you know this or not. There is a satellite images company for hire. You can pay them money and you can get data from them. Guess what was one of the most frequently downloaded data in and around India in the last 2 months before April 22nd, the area where the Pahalgam attack happened. A whole slew of people knew what was going on. So I just wanted to place that in context in viewers' minds. Over to you, Prasiddha. Talk to us a little bit about how this report came about, and we'll have a few follow-up questions on that. Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me. What inspired this report is that really for the last over a year or so, I've been very closely monitoring Pakistani influence operations. In fact, my thesis from Carnegie Mellon was precisely about Pakistani info ops and how it targets specifically Indian social media and other issues across the Indian subcontinent. And this is when this really did come about, was right after the Pahalgam attack, when there was still a lot of confusion and angst and anxiety about how many people have been murdered in Pahalgam by terrorists, that immediately following this attack, within several hours, there were already inauthentic Pakistani networks that had been amplifying this idea that this was a false flag operation. So we see this is very common in any sort of standard military operations, whether we take a look at like Ukraine, Russia, or Israel, Hamas, and now with India, Pakistan, you see this idea that, oh, this is in fact just like an Indian false flag operation, that India orchestrated these attacks, and trying to mainstream this as an idea, not just like limited to Pakistani social media circles. So what we saw is very interesting and also very standard in these sort of like Pakistani info ops campaigns, that they're kind of like low intensity campaigns, large number of inauthentic accounts that are involved, bot-driven amplification, which is again sort of like standard that we see across different geopolitical issues. But now the question is like, how do we see this, for example, in coordination with other generated AI campaigns that will recreate all types of memes? And I think what's particularly interesting about this specific one is that this isn't limited to these, I guess, like Pakistani, pro-Pakistani echo chambers across the internet. And in fact, that this is also reaching Western influencers. And this is reaching Western influencers that have some sort of shady ties and have also gotten heavily involved in other sorts of geopolitical conflicts like Israel, Hamas, like in Russia, Ukraine, and promoting, I guess, this sort of like alternate media ideas. And I think that this is also important because when we see like just individuals in America who are watching the news, like we have CNN, Fox News, and so many other, I guess, TV channels that are out there. But now I think this is really about an erode of trust. Like you see, when you look at these news channels, really, if you look at their numbers, they are on the decline. And that's what, like, I guess these vacuums and holes that like social media and other this sort of like alternate media influencers, podcasters are all sort of like joining on to create new sets of narratives. And you see like immediately once this Pahalgam terrorist attack happened, that we see like former members from the Pakistani government openly saying that this was a false flag, but it's not limited to them saying it. It's also bot-driven amplification and also very close coordination with these Western influencers that have huge platforms, millions of followers. And this sort of message is being pumped across to these Western influencers to sort of skew perspectives about the real terrorist attack that happened, which murdered 26 people.
Thank you so much. So there are three main categories that you have listed here. First one is bot level amplification. You said that around April 2025, close to 20,000 tweets were put out, and after or during that incident, a whole bunch of new accounts were created to amplify the fake narrative. Now, Prasiddha, walk us through this a little bit. Why do the bot accounts have to be created after the incident and not before, or is it just fact that these guys wanted to, once it is done, it is for sure, so that they can start creating these bot accounts? How does that process work?
So it's a great question. Typically, bot activity and any sort of like coordinated inauthentic behavior is done through two means. The first is just reactivating old accounts. So, for example, one of the things that we had been noticing sort of outside of this investigation was, in general, a lot of anti-Indian immigrant like sort of animosity. And when we take a look at, let's say, who are some of these accounts that are putting this out, one of the prominent examples of a tweet that was going quite viral talked about how it was like documenting persecution in India. But when we take a look at it, in fact, the last tweet from that account was in 2016. But then right after Pahalgam, this account became reactive and then started saying that, Indian immigrants are burning churches in the UK, when it turned out that never happened in the first place. So basically reusing some of these old accounts that have been created, let's say like 2016, 2017, and so on, and simply just reactivating them to push this new narrative of like, oh, India is doing a false flag operation. That's like a fairly simple, straightforward process. But then when we take also a look at, let's say, accounts that are created right after this terrorist attack happened, we can get the account creation dates, for instance, and see like hundreds of accounts that have been created simply for the sole purpose of putting out tweets that suggest that India did this attack themselves.
Now, are these manually created, or these are auto-created using some sort of a software?
I think it's very difficult to say because we don't have that data available. But from my inclination is to say that it's a mix of these two methods. Individuals that are manually creating it. But again, when we take a look at, let's say, large-scale amplification, there's also possibilities of some sort of like automated behavior happening as well.
I have seen, Android farms in China, where you have a server rack. Instead of having the rack, servers, they'll have these Androids connected, stream and strings and strings and strings of them. Then there is, of course, this usual one computer monitor and one guy sitting in front of it. And they say that this guy has programmed everything. And then once he hits the enter button, all these things will have proxy servers that they'll start putting proxies needed to try and, make it look like you're from a different IP address to try and look genuine. So this is something that China has been doing. And it has been said that people in North Korea, Iran, Turkey, all of them do it. So that's why I was curious about that. The second one, weaponization using artificial intelligence. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So using AI, what we see is that several AI-generated memes that are created. I think if we scroll further on within this report, there are some examples that we can highlight. I think if you keep going. Next one. Another one. I think another one. Okay, here we go. So here's a perfect example of some of these AI-generated memes saying that Indian false flag exposed, with individuals from the army and also the prime minister reiterating these same exact memes. All that needs to be done is, let's say, one of these users that's been created to amplify this false flag claim then just has to recycle the same memes, and you see the same types of inauthentic actors in this network, and also, let's say, other influencers that are state affiliated or state sympathetic, let's say, reiterating the same exact memes about India doing this false flag operation. And I think this is very interesting and very increasingly common in the sort of like cyber social warfare, is that the use of AI generated memes seem to be particularly pertinent. And I think that this is an example of where this has been recycled in a sort of influence operation way.
Prasiddha, curiosity question. The hashtag with Urdu written in it is, should the hashtag also not be at the end? Because you're supposed to read it backwards, isn't it?
Actually, I actually don't know as to like which order, if this was consistent across like all of the tweets. But I do find it interesting, right? Like this specific hashtag that's being put out, which is very, I guess, like specific to targeting individuals from a particular religion. And that is being put out along with these hashtags, right? And I think that also goes to show the sort of like religious bias, religious animosity that's being created here.
Prasiddha, you have to educate our viewers on this one. The third option is the co-option of global influence. We remember that porn artist, I don't even remember her name. Then you had Greta Thunberg once, then Shakira, maybe, I don't know. You well, big,
Rihanna, right?
yeah, big well-known personalities in other fields of life suddenly jump in and start doing anti-Hindu stuff or anti-Indian stuff. So here you've said that a malicious influencer tied to Russian, Chinese, Iranian and Houthi interests, Jackson Hinkle, interviewed Pakistan's former ambassador who seeded the false flag narrative and then robustly amplified it over the following weeks to a global audience that accrued millions of views. First of all, I don't know who Jackson Hinkle is, and I suspect many of our viewers don't. Talk to us a little bit about this influencer. What does he do? And take it from there.
Yeah, so this influencer has a lot of ties, which has been documented in this report and also among several other research subjects, just with very shady influences to different foreign adversarial regimes, which I feel like is better explained through some of this literature because I just feel like some of this is more coming from other researchers, which I feel like would be better explained in that way. But I think let's go to the next page because what this specific investigation focuses on is very specific to Pahalgam. So actually, I think one more page.
Sure.
Yes. Okay. So here, when we take a look at this first graph, we see that this idea of false flag being immediately amplified by, let's say, Pakistani bots, Pakistani state actors. You see this former Pakistani ambassador coming here and saying that this was a false flag operation, which has sort of created a spike in the network. That's sort of like becoming very big across Twitter. It's also circulating across Pakistani Twitter. But you see really like between this and the beginning of Operation Sindoor that there's hardly any sort of activity or action about this. But then, sorry, if you go back to the previous page.
Sure.
So here, what we see is that this outreach from these Pakistani state actors and government officials, you see that they're appearing on these sort of like, I guess, more fringe podcasts from these domestic influencers with ties to foreign regimes, actually talking about how, in fact, this is a false flag operation. It's so clear that India did this operation and amplifying this type of narrative using their platform, which has collectively reached over 1 million views. So what we saw is these sort of like low intensity campaigns is really taken on to new heights. And it's taken on to new heights because they're not just sort of echo chambers that are immediate within these types of circles, but in fact that these are reaching Western audiences, global audiences in ways that we have never really seen before. And I think that makes it all the more important and relevant to, let's say, what happens domestically within the US to Indian and Hindu communities, because you see that this sort of hate and this sort of like idea that, oh, like India did it themselves is sort of diminishing when communities are organizing and coming together to pay their respects to victims, and now suggesting that India has now done it itself. So this is now reaching a different set of audiences that it would have never reached before. And actually, if we go back to the graph, so over here, you see that right after this interview actually took place, then this influencer immediately tweeted out about this when Operation Sindoor had started, several different tweets about this being a false flag. And you see that is what is going the most viral, like significantly more viral than any of these like bot-driven AI-generated memes that has ever been there before. So I think this makes it important to notice, because when there are domestic influencers that are being weaponized by these foreign authoritarian regimes, that this causes all the more concern for individuals in the domestic realm to really pay attention, that this isn't something like an info op that's happening all the way across the world, but now how is it impacting real world communities in let's say, the United States?
Thank you so much. And let's get back to the main thing. So how long did it take for you to compile this research? Because this is only 4 weeks or less than 4 weeks since the whole thing happened.
I would say probably in around 2 or 3 weeks, we actually had this paper ready. And it also got coverage from the New York Post and from First Post.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the whole point of a paper...
You're a rock star.
No, thank you. I think the point of a paper like this, though, honestly, is so that how do we use, once again, our data science and machine learning and different capabilities to be able to track this sort of hatred and try to see how exactly is this impacting individuals domestically within the US? Because again, like, it's very easy, I think, across the Twitter sphere, any sort of social media for that matter, to be sort of stuck in these like echo chambers. And from understanding and reading about Pakistani info ops for more than a year now, I have always felt like some of these campaigns are very low intensity, and there's always been a big question mark of, well, how successful are these campaigns? What exactly are their end goals? Are they reaching those end goals, and so on? But now when we see this convergence with sort of these shady Western influencers that have previous ties to different hostile regimes, like in China, for instance, like this really calls into question how exactly are these influencers being used against a country like India, the world's largest democracy.
Thank you so much. And in conclusion, one of the things that India needs to take away is it needs to have its own factory. There is no other way. I mean, you have to, if the other side is firing bullets at you, you can't have swords and arrows. It's not going to work. So in terms of communications, India needs to still do a lot of work. And I have been saying this for a long time. I don't know what are the compulsions that Indian government has. They have been more or less working in like, we are a sovereign country, we respect, and we don't indulge in lobbying. I think those days have changed. I think India needs to take away. I'm hoping that somebody from PMO reads the document entirely. I'll put the link in the reference link section of description. So viewers, please do read it. It's just 12 pages. It's not very long. And Prasiddha has done wonderful work trying to bring out the salient points here as to what really happened. And I can tell you, Prasiddha, whoever I talked to after I came back from India, I was there when the whole thing was happening. And I left. I landed on 22nd April, by the way. So I know what was going on there completely. And when I came to US, the story was exactly 180 degrees opposite. Everybody thought that Pakistan had won the confidence. What? Where did you? Who fed you this Kool-Aid? It was my first question. And everywhere they say, wherever we look, this is what it is. India hadn't done anything. I mean, now India is pushing back hard, but this is like what, 1 month later, and they are trickling like Chinese torture, one new picture at a time of another thing taken out, another damage inflicted. But if they should have done a little bit more aggressively. Be that as it may, I think I'm hoping that Indian government uses services such as NCRI to get to the data and at least try and analyze how things are going. This is invaluable research, in my opinion, and thanks for doing this, Prasiddha. Hats off to you and NCRI. You guys have the right tools and you do some wonderful work, and all the best in your career. And we'll be back with you hopefully very soon. Namaskar.
Namaste. No, thank you so much. I actually do want to say one last point about
Sure.
What needs to be done in response to, let's say, this type of info op. And I think that one of the things that we do see that's very interesting and a big distinction between, let's say, how like Pakistani PR is versus Indian PR. You see, for example, Pakistani PR government officials, and I think this is something actually that Yalda Hakim had also pointed out from Sky News, of how there's a big willingness, let's say, from like individuals from the Pakistani government to be able to engage very openly with Pakistani media. In fact, the defense minister's interview with Yalda went quite viral, right? Of when she was asking these very difficult questions to him, really pushing back on the things that he was saying. But you see, for example, on the Indian side, the major response here is really to try to block accounts that are like putting out these sort of like threatening narratives or any sort of like individuals that are deemed as a threat to national security. So what this creates is this sort of, again, like a vacuum where you are not able to access the same types of information. And so this results in a lot of bad faith actors being able to, I guess, put themselves in a space instead of, and now there's a big goal and question of how do we stop this malicious narrative from spreading, as opposed to thinking about how is it that, let's say, a country like India is able to put out its own narrative, its own voice, and be able to, in fact, engage with these different audiences, especially in audiences that are vehemently, let's say, against India or very skeptical about some of the claims. But how do we actually engage in a way that makes it very possible to just retort this in the most respectful, most fact-based and data-driven way? And I think that that sort of needs to happen. And it shouldn't just happen when, let's say, there's sort of like any kind of tension or something, like immediately after this horrible, worst terrorist attack in decades. There should be effort to immediately talk about, so what has happened here? What are the details? How do we engage with the foreign press so that immediately like this is documented in a way that's fair, nuanced, and balanced. Because as we know, coverage of Hindus is not exactly very fair, right, in the media. So I think having this sort of open, I guess, open engagement, open conversations, dialogue, and being able to do this in a way that's very respectful, I think is what's really like lacking here. And that fundamentally needs to change, because that's also how we strengthen trust again. I talked in the beginning about how, you know, we have CNN, we have Fox News, but people are so polarized that like it's so difficult to bring people together to some sort of like consensus and common ground. But now when we have these difficult conversations, when we talk to people we disagree with, this makes it all the more important to do that, so that we can come to some sort of ground and people feel that, okay, now I can actually listen, because there is that common sort of trust reestablished.
Thank you so much. And in passing, I should also mention, viewers, that the delegations that India sent to various country capitals to talk about this, they could have been better prepared. That was the feedback I got from people who attended these events, that the data presented could have been more crisp, and you had all the proof in your hands. The army had done it. But from that point on to the package that was sent along with this team, somewhere it looks like it's not as good as it could have been. Like this 12-page document, viewers, I'm telling you, I just looked at the first page and I knew exactly what the content was going to be. And that's how we had this conversation. And there is a way to present these reports. I think India needs to do some more work on that. I'm not saying it was totally bad, but people just said that you are up against a consummate player. He's lying. So to cover up his lies, he's going to do the best lipstick he can put on the pig that he's presenting. That is the point. That is the takeaway. I don't know when India will realize this. This warfare also has to be won. Unfortunately, this stays in people's minds a lot longer than what happened on the ground. Thanks once again, Prasiddha. Namaskar.
Namaste. Thank you.